Welcome to Landscape Photo Editing Sessions. I'm Ryata Akiri. In this episode, I'm going to be editing a seascape photo, but this one is interesting. I'm actually going to be replacing the sky with one I took a little bit earlier because it's just a lot nicer. Alright, so I have these three photos. This is for the sky. I have a bracketed exposure, and then these two bracketed exposures for the foreground. So I'm going to use this photo for the foreground itself, and I'm just going to use this one for the kind of a bright part on the sky, or I mean on the ocean. So that's going to fix out the blown out highlights right there. So I'm going to be using Luminosity mask to combine the exposures. Alright, I'm going to get started by editing this one in Lightroom. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. And then I'm going to take the vignetting maybe back to 47. Alright. And then I'm going to make the white balance a little bit warmer. This image is a bit cool right now, so I'm going to change it to around 4500. And the tint, I'm going to take it back just a little bit. Alright, I want a little bit more detail in the shadows. And a little bit less in the highlights to take down those highlights that were too bright. And then I'm just going to increase the blacks just a little bit. I want more detail in the dark areas. I'm going to increase the vibrance by quite a bit to get more color in the ocean and the foreground, so that nice blue color in the wave and the nice warm tones of the reflection in the water. Alright, so that's all for the foreground. I'm going to copy and paste it to the other photo, so Ctrl-Shift-C to copy. I'm going to make sure check all the settings, and then Ctrl-Shift-V to paste it to the other photo. I'm also going to go ahead and paste it to the sky photos. I'm going to actually change the white balance though, so it's a little bit too purple or magenta now. So I'm going to take that to around +5, and then I'm going to take this down a bit cooler to around 40 or 4000. And I'm also going to take the highlights down just a little bit more for the sky areas that are too bright. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste these to the rest of the photos. Alright, that's pretty good. So I've finished the editing in Lightroom. I'm going to select them all and then open them as layers in Photoshop. I have all the photos open in Photoshop, and now I'm going to work on the sky layer, so combining the underexposed and the overexposed layers to fix the blown out highlights. So I'm going to be using Luminosity mask, and those are selections based on the brightest pixel values and the darkest ones, so it's going to go from dark to bright, and then it also selects midtones. So to use the luminosity mask, I'm going to generate them based on the brightness values of the regular exposure of the image. So I'm going to make only the regular exposure visible, and then go ahead and generate those. So I'm going to put the actions in the description. Alright, so my actions or luminosity mask are generated in the channels. I'm going to find a channel that has a good brightness to combine the regular exposure layer with the overexposed layer. So I want to fix the blown out highlights. So I want to find a good selection just for that. So I think Brights 2 will do a good job. So I can go ahead and select that, Control click on the thumbnail to select that mask or channel. And then I'm going to select the layer I want the mask applied to, and then click the layer mask icon. Alright, so that did a pretty good job. And now for the underexposed layer to fix the rest of the blown out highlights. So I'm going to go to a really selective channel. So Brights 5 looks pretty good. So it's only going to select the brightest parts of the image, which was just the area around the sun and the sun itself. So control click and then apply the mask. Alright, that's pretty good. So it kind of looks unnatural now. And to take back this unnatural, or to make it look more realistic, I'm actually going to lower the opacity of the layer a little bit. So 60%, maybe 70%. Alright. For this one, it needs to take the opacity way back. So I'm going to try 20%. Alright, I think 20% is good. So I finished combining the 3 layers for the sky. I'm going to go ahead and group them. Control G to group them. So I'm going to keep it all organized in one layer. It'll make it easier to work with. I'm going to go ahead and hide that. And then I'm going to combine the 2 foreground layers. So the only thing I need to fix for this image is the blown out part in the ocean. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the luminosity mask. And then I'm going to make only this one visible because I want the luminosity mask to generate the brightness values for this image only. So I can go ahead and generate them. Alright. So I'm going to go in my channels and then find a good one to use. So I want one that will have a good selection of the ocean and not too much of the darker parts. So I think Brights 3 is the contender. I'm going to go ahead and select it and then mask it off. Alright. So I'm going to take down the opacity just 40%, maybe a little bit less, 30%. Alright, that's pretty good. I'm also going to remove that from the foreground. I'd want this layer affecting the foreground. So I'm going to go in my mask, Alt click on the thumbnail. Then I'm going to use a brush, a large soft black one. And then I'm just going to paint out the area of the foreground. And then I'm going to leave the bright ocean over here where the blown out parts are. And that's pretty good. The next thing I want to do is create a selection of the water, or the sky, I mean. So I'm going to go ahead and create the selection of the sky, and then I'll be able to mask the actual sky layer in. So what I want to do is use the quick selection tool, the easiest way. And then I'm going to select my image and then just select the sky, and it should automatically do a good job selecting. Since this image has a easily detectable horizon line, it's able to select that easily. Alright, the next step I want to do is get a better selection. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in 100% and then use my refine edge tool and increase the radius. So right now the edges are kind of rough. So if I increase this radius, it's automatically going to expand the selection by 1 pixel, and it automatically detects the edge. So that's one of the good features of Photoshop. So I'm actually going to select it to 2 pixels. I want there to be a little bit more radius to that edge. and it's doing a pretty good job of selecting out only the sky. And then this selection isn't, it's a little bit rough, so I'm going to smooth it out a little bit. I'm also going to increase the contrast. Just to make the edge a little bit sharper. And I'm going to output to a selection. Alright, so now the sky is selected. And I can go ahead and save that selection in case I need it later. So I'll save it to his channel. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is move this layer on top of the sky to make it aligned. So I'm going to go ahead and expand the crop so I have room to work. I'm going to change the opacity of the sky layer so that I can see below it. So 50%, and then I'm going to move it and try to align the sun. So I'm just going to do a rough alignment. And I'm also going to stretch this image up a little bit to expand the sky. And just in case you're wondering, it would be realistic to do this because shooting this at portrait orientation, it distorts the image a lot, having the camera pointed towards the foreground. So it'll stretch out the edges of the frame, making the sky look stretched more. So I can actually stretch this a little bit and it'll still be okay, because that's how it would actually look if I were to shoot it in portrait orientation. So I'm trying to make it as realistic as possible. Alright, so I'm going to take the opacity back down and realign this. Alright, so the angle is a little bit off on this image. So I'm going to go ahead and transform it. So Control T will bring up the transform tool, and then I'm going to change the angle. So I'm going to set it to about 1.5. So that'll fix, that should fix it. No, maybe the other way. So plus 1.5. Oh, actually that's too much. Actually it's got to be 0.15, I mean. Alright. That's better. And to have a good selection, I'm actually gonna make the sky layer slightly below the foreground layer so that the sky is a little bit below, or the horizon is a little bit below the other one. And that'll make it easier to actually apply the mask so that it'll only, like, no ocean will be showing from the other image. Alright, so that's pretty good. I'm going to change the opacity back to 100%. I'm also going to make sure the sun is in the right place, and right now it's not. So I'm going to go ahead and move that. Move it over a little bit more. Alright, that's good. So the sun is aligned now. And now I can actually go in my channels, go to that sky selection I had, select it, and then apply the layer mask to the photo. Alright, not bad. So there's still a lot of work to do, and right now it looks unrealistic with how underexposed, I guess, this is. It's not bright enough. Also, I'm going to fix this line a little bit more. Alright, so the sky on the foreground layer is showing through a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and refine the edge a little bit. So I'm going to double click or go to the properties of the layer mask. I'm going to mask the edge and then increase the edge a little bit more so that it'll take away any remaining sky on the foreground layer. I'm also going to increase the contrast just a little bit. Maybe that needs a little bit more. Alright, that's pretty good. And before, after. Before, you see an obvious bright line on the horizon, then after. So that's a lot better. I'm going to go ahead and crop this down just to make it nicer to work with. Alright, so the thing with sky replacement is that you can't really use any sky. You want it to make it realistic as possible. And for this one, shooting during the same time or just 5 minutes before at the same place, same day, is what allowed me to actually replace the sky. And the sun being in the same spot with the reflection in the water. So once I finish this up, you won't be able to tell that I actually replaced the sky. So the next thing I want to do to make it more realistic is to increase the brightness and match it to the water. So right now the water is a little bit brighter right here, I think. And it's rare that the water is actually brighter than the sky, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that. I'm going to add a curve adjustment to my sky layer group. I'm going to go ahead and rename this real fast. And then I'm going to use the targeted adjustment tool and then just go to the bright area around the horizon. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit more. And I'm going to increase the brightness until it looks more realistic. Alright, that's a lot better. And then I'm gonna take it down at a dark area of the cloud. I'm also gonna go ahead and fix that so it's flat. Alright, so before and after, now it looks a lot more realistic and it actually matches the scene a lot better. And the problem with this is that it's making it a little bit too bright in the bright area around the sun. So I'm going to go and use a luminosity mask to mask out the bright areas so that this isn't making it too bright. So first I need to delete the existing ones and create new ones. And then I'm going to go to my brights. So I want one that has a good selection of the bright areas, but not too much around the horizon. So I think brights 5 would do a good job. Maybe in brights 4. I'm going to try brights 4. Apply it to my curve adjustment mask. I'm going to use Alt and Delete to fill my selection with my foreground color, which is black. Alright, so there we go. I'm going to fill it one more time. Alright. So before and after. So it's kind of reducing the bright areas from being affected from this curve adjustment. And that's pretty good. Alright, one final thing I want to do to the sky is to adjust the color just a little bit so it matches with the foreground. So I'm going to add a curve adjustment. I'm going to change the blending mode to color so that only the color is affected. And then I'm going to remove a little bit of green in the highlights. I'm going to bring it back in the shadows. And just might need a little bit of blue in the darker areas or even the highlights. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. And now I think the sky looks like it was, or it actually looks natural now. So before and after. Alright, the next thing I want to do is give the sky a big boost in contrast. Right now it's pretty flat and it needs to match the foreground a little bit more. So I'm actually going to go to my channels, and instead of selecting any of these darks or brights, I'm actually going to select midtones. So this way the adjustments I make won't affect the brightest areas or the darkest areas. So I can go ahead and select the midtones and create a curve adjustment. And right now I think the sky is too bright, or I'm losing too much detail in the bright areas. So I want to actually go to my target adjustment tool, go to my highlights, bring it down just a little bit, and then go to my darker areas in the cloud and bring that down. So this is adding an S curve when the point in the highlights is higher than the point in the shadows. So it's creating kind of a S. So I'm going to bring that down and to around there. So that added a nice boost in contrast to the image. I'm actually going to remove the effect from the foreground though. So I'm going to go ahead and go in my layer mask, use a large black brush and just mask it out. I'm only going to do up to the top of the wave. Alright, that's pretty good. And another way to make it a bit more realistic is to darken the water at the horizon a little bit. And that's what that midtones adjustment did. It also added more contrast to the sky, because using luminosity mask actually flattens out the contrast. So adding contrast in the midtones makes it look normal. Alright, I don't really like the color that's adding to the image over here. So I'm actually going to change the blending mode to luminosity so that only the brightness values of this adjustment are affected. The next thing I want to do is add more detail in the foreground, or more contrast. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my foreground layer and create a curve adjustment below the sky layer but above the foreground layer. And I'm going to go ahead and find this flow of water over here. I want to brighten it up so that the viewer's eye is led to this flowing water over here. So I increase the brightness of that. Then I'm going to go to my dark part over here and bring that down. So this is creating an S curve. And I don't want to darken it too much, or else I'll be starting to clip the blacks. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and invert this mask because I only want to apply it to the foreground rocks over here. So Control I on the mask to invert it. And then I'm just going to use a white brush, a soft white brush, and then just fill it in. So I'm using the bracket keys to adjust the brush size. Alright, so once I did the edge of that, I don't need to worry about it anymore. So I'll just go to the mask, alt click on the mask to see the preview. Makes it easier to fill it in. And I'm just going to check if any of the edges are being affected, because I don't want the water over here to be brighter. So it looks good. And the next thing I want to do is darken down the water a little bit here. It's too bright. I also want to increase the contrast so this wave stands out a little bit more. So I'm going to add another curve adjustment. And then I'm going to go to the darker part of the wave over here. I'm going to bring it down to the brightness I want. And then I'm going to bring this over here back up just to add more contrast. But I'm going to leave it down just a little bit so that it reduces the overall brightness. Alright, that's pretty good. And to make it easy, I'm just going to apply this layer mask to this one and then invert it after. So I'm holding down Alt and dragging the thumbnail to this layer, and that will duplicate the layer mask. I'll just go ahead and invert it. So now I have an exact selection of just the water over here. And I'm thinking this part over here is too dark now. So I can go with my brush tool, a black brush, size it down a little bit, then paint out this area of the horizon. Alright, that's pretty good. And over here, this little part over here, it's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go lower the opacity of the brush, maybe 20%. Using a black brush, I'll go ahead and just brush this area out. So I'm going from a large brush to affect more of a larger radius down to this smaller brush so that it only affects the smaller part. So that's pretty good. And as you can see, there's a nice feathered area that's being masked out. Alright. That looks pretty good. Alright, I'm almost done, and I want to do another final color adjustment. So I'm going to add a curve adjustment above all the layers. I'm going to change the blending mode to color. And I like to add more blue into the shadows and then decrease the amount of blues in the highlights. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this bottom point, bring it up a little bit. I'm going to go to this top point and bring it down a little bit. Alright, that's pretty good. And there's one more thing. I want to adjust the color of the foreground a little bit more, because I didn't do any color adjustments on there. So I can go ahead and add a curve adjustment, change the blending mode to color. And what I want to do is add a little bit red in the foreground or in the shadows. And then I want to decrease the amount of red in the brighter areas. Alright, I think that need a little bit more. Alright. And I'm going to go ahead and change the opacity down a little bit more, just to make the adjustment a little bit less intense. Alright, I think that's pretty good. So I want to add a little bit more red in the sky to match the foreground. So I'm going to go in my color adjustment I made before. And then I'm going to add a little bit more red in the highlights. And then just bring it back down in the midtones. Alright, that's better. And the final thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of a glow effect to the image. So I'm going to create a stamp layer of basically making a clone or a layer of everything visible. So using the shortcut Control Shift Alt and E, that'll create a stamp layer. To create the glow effect, I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur to the layer. So 25 is a good radius. And then I'm going to change the opacity of this layer to 10%. So usually I'll adjust it around 5 to 20% is a good amount. So 10%. If I do it 30%, the glow effect is a lot more intense. So I'll go back down to 10%. And then to add a little bit of a contrast to the glow layer, I'm going to apply a curve adjustment and then hold down Alt and click between the layers to make it a clipping mask so that it will only affect the layer below it. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and add a slight S-curve to the curve adjustment. Alright, so that's pretty good. Final thing, I'm going to crop it. So the sun isn't in the middle, so I can go ahead and crop out the foreground a little bit. Alright, so I'm just trying to line up the sun. And then I'm going to make sure the sky or the horizon is straight. So I'm going to add a ruler to the image and then crop it. So it needs a little bit more. Alright, that's pretty good. And then I'm going to fix this a little bit of transparent edges are coming into the image. Alright, so that's finished with the image. So that was quite a bit, and this is the first time I actually did a sky replacement like this. So first I started with the sky layers. So here's my base layer for the sky overexposed. Use luminosity mask to bring in more of the blown out high parts back in. And then this is just to so I'm gonna hold that back right now. Alright, so then I took care of the foreground, fixed the blown out areas, and then I selected out the sky and then masked it in with a new sky. To make it more realistic, I added more brightness to it using a curve adjustment. I also did a color adjustment to it to add more reds and less greens. And I'm thinking right now it looks too red right now. Or actually I'm going to bring the greens back. Alright, that's better. And then I adjusted the foreground to add more contrast. Over here I darkened out the water over here and then added more contrast so that the wave pops out more. I also added a color adjustment to add more color or red to the shadows. I also did a midtones adjustment to add more contrast in the sky and darken out the ocean horizon a little bit more to make it more realistic. And then finally a color adjustment and then a glow effect. Alright, thanks for watching this video, and if you found it useful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't done so already.